So, first of all, I want to call your attention to the way we rearranged the room. You might have noticed it when you came in. Room setups are a form of visible architecture. Architecture can make you feel different ways. The architecture that we set the room up in is essentially the one you see down there. It's the alchemical squaring the circle with some randomness at the edges. So just be aware and think of how you felt when you came in and it was different. It wasn't in rows anymore. So my talk is going to be an unusual talk. Glenn knows I don't color within the lines. I don't talk within the rules. Since college, I also want to say that, Glenn, I have prepared to be spontaneous. And as you notice me like falling over there, how much more spontaneous could you get, okay? So this is going to be a participatory talk. This is going to be an act of co-creation. We heard many of the speakers over the Zoom sessions talk about the need for co-creation. Well, how do we do that? Let's practice. We're going to do that today. So since college, I've been interested in the relationship between form and content. And when I could, I would try to get them to mirror or reinforce each other. I've also been interested in questions. I was always one to ask a lot of questions in class, and I wondered, like, why are these people not asking questions? So I studied questions. I studied them from the motivational stance, like, why do some people ask a lot of questions? and why do some people don't? I also wanted to know how it is that we can know enough about what we don't know in order to ask a question about it. So that's the epistemological perspective. So today I want to apply both of these practices, the mirroring of form and content, and asking questions. So the content that I want to talk about pertains to the need that I see to evolve language co-creatively. So I wondered how I could do that with a group of people who I don't know and don't know what I want to say. How can we do that co-creatively? So I wondered what format to use. A question and answer format, of course, but you don't know what I'm going to say, so how could you ask me questions? So I came up with the questions that you're going to ask me. These questions, yeah, if you want to come hand these out. So some of these cards, you'll each get a card. Some of them have questions on the back. If you don't want to participate in this, don't take a card. Yeah, like shameless self-promotion here. So this is how this co-creation is going to work. On the back of some of the cards are questions. And these are questions from my book. here's how I envision it. So we're going to start with number one. Whoever got number one, well, that's okay. It's sort of random. So if somebody got number one, that's the one we're going to start with. Okay. But the rest of you have to listen and determine when is the right time to pose your question. Now, there is no right time or wrong time. It will be an intuitive feeling or, reasoned out, well, she's been talking about this, and then this seems like the next logical direction to go in, however it works for you. Okay, so we'll start with the first question. And let me turn on my timer here, just so that I can keep an idea of the pacing. Okay. And Jonathan hasn't come back yet. That's okay. Okay, so are there any questions before I start taking questions? Yes. That's not, well, there aren't enough questions for everybody. If are there still leftovers? Yeah. Okay, well, flip through those, and if somebody has a blank that wants a question, give them a question. Oh, right, this is great. I love this kind of participation. Okay, who has number one? Let's get started. Okay, Jean-Michel.
What does the title mean? Future for language.
Okay, so what does the title mean? A new future for language. So why do we need a new language for the future? What does that even mean? An old future might look like the status quo. It will keep on keeping on, maybe some neologisms here and there as people invent new stuff. So what? The so what is actually very important for people like us who like to talk about integration and mutations of consciousness. Okay, if our consciousness is mutating, is becoming more, or we are becoming more aware of the integral within us, we have to ask ourselves, is our language keeping up with that? Is the language we're using right now up to the task of bringing in integral consciousness in a larger way into this world? So Gebser's opus, in a way, shows us the broad strokes of how we have expressed ourselves differently based on different types of different type of consciousness that was present or prominent. We explained the world using stories, myths, until a new structure of consciousness emerged as prominent. Then we started explaining the world using theories and facts. Yes. And numbers and reasoning. So we invented a slew of new terms to name the parts and subparts of the world that we have sliced apart. And now we are realizing that that form of consciousness can only take us so far. Gebser realized it. He called for a new form of statement. Listen closely. A new form. Not just new statements. We're already doing that all the time. Well, Actually, most of our stating is just sort of repeating cliches. But for people like us who like to think about the unthought of yet, I'm going to assume that you might actually want to think about new forms of language to support and express our emerging forms of consciousness. Now, some of you might say that highly advanced consciousness cannot be put into words. Yes, that is exactly right. Consider that our words, as well as the other interconnected systems that make up language, are not up to the job of expressing integral consciousness. So, can we develop language that might be better able to do it? Granted, some things will always be ineffable. But there are things we could F if we came up with novel ways to do it. I invite you to ponder with me now and in the future what might be necessary for language to better express integrality, ongoing integration as a process, not a product, because it never ends, does it? With the efflorescence of integral consciousness, we will always be integrating. So how can we better express such a process without turning it into an endpoint? Done. Check. Next. First, we must ask, indeed, what does language involve? It's not just words. They're the leaves. What does the tree consist of? The trunk, the roots, the soil. Language is an interconnected system of systems. Some of them are more present to our consciousness than others. Things like grammar and syntax. Gebser talked about how the integral was starting to show up in new grammars. Grammar and syntax are the rules for how sentences can be put together. Some languages use a root and affix method. So essentially an entire thought, which would take us a whole sentence to say, is put into a single word. Semantics. Words don't have single meaning. So we have to take various contexts into account. Concepts. These are like the ideas in our head about what the word means. Words don't often refer to things in space. I can point to a flower, and that's one kind of reference. But I could talk about the flowers I saw last week in my neighbor's yard. And I have this image of, very beautiful orange, flowers in my head that you don't have in your head. Logic. Logic consists of basic rules for determining what can be said and or what is true within the bounds of a culture's presupposed category structure. So, category structure. The previous notions are things we're conscious of. Mostly, we don't think about logic unless you have to take a course in college. We don't think much about category structure because we learn it mostly unconsciously. We learn language as children. We absorb notions of what is alive or not, what is sentient or not, what is changeable or not, what can have emotions, what can't move. We learn, for example, that trees don't have emotions and rocks are lifeless matter. Well, not in all cultures. They have different category structures. Culture. Culture and language. Culture is the deep well from which language drinks. Culture determines what in the environment should be noticed, how it should be treated. In other words, what should matter to you as a member of that culture. So these are the sets of emotions, or sets of assumptions. I'm sorry, there are sets of assumptions at every one of those levels. I want us to question some of our deeply held assumptions. In questioning them and possibly revising them, we can find new structures for language. Next. Okay, can you bring the microphone over to, she has, I can't see. Excellent.
And I have glasses. Okay. Solving problems using the same mindset that created them is like trying to fix a leaky pipe by using a tool that causes more leaks. How do we extricate ourselves from such a vicious cycle, but also from the category structures?
Okay. So this is the first time I'm giving this presentation. I have not, like it's not in my bones yet. So let me go to my cheat sheet. This is a fun one. I'll repeat it here. Solving problems using the same mindset that created them is like trying to fix a leaky pipe by using a tool that causes more leaks. How can we extricate ourselves from such a vicious cycle? So there's a bit of a koan in that question, right? The quick and dirty answer to it is come from a different mindset, preferably a better one. Yeah, but that's not as easy as it sounds. And yet, when it does happen, it can happen in a nanosecond. The scales can fall from your eyes. You go, oh, how did I miss that? We can't make such moments happen. All we can do is prepare the ground, plant the seeds, cry the tears of frustration, and be patient. There are stories of this sort of thing happening in science. The structure of the benzene ring came in a dream about an Ouroboros, for example. And I've read stories of people whose worldview changed like that after experiencing an entheogenic experience. I'm not necessarily advocating that. Bad trips are possible too. It's a personal thing. So first, with regard to mindsets, it's necessary to become cognizant of the mindset that one has. That ain't easy. It's easier to see the mindset in others. Okay. That's okay. I haven't needed it yet.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we'll just leave that there for now. Yeah. Nope, there it is. All right. Okay, so where were we? Back to mindsets. Becoming cognizant of one's mindset. It's not easy. So because we can see the mindset in others easier than we can see our own, we will have to help each other and reflect back to our friends in a safe setting, of course, and with all good intentions, the parts of their mindset that they can't see for themselves, and they can do that for you. Second, it's necessary to see what the effects of one's mindset are. Again, it's easier to analyze than others. Netflix, for example, had a whole series that essentially showed the effects of the more money is better mindset. And it became very clear that unrestrained greed seems to destroy not only the environment, but also the engine for that greed, such as the particular corporation or industry that is pursuing profit above all else. Third, and hardest, it's necessary to put that tool down, that mindset. It's hard to stop using such tools, thought patterns that we've been trained to use our entire lives, language that we grew up with. But we do that for fun. Just look at all the people who prefer their online avatar to their in-person personality. Maybe that's the value of video games. I don't know. The jury's still out. And fourth, and harder still, oh yes, there is a harder after hardest. Inventing new tools. We have entire schools of engineering to learn how to do that in physical and mechanical space. Why don't we have schools to do that in language space? Okay, next question.
What is space? Are we separate from it?
Okay, I will repeat that. What is space? Are we separate from it? You get 2 questions. Congratulations. So, we've heard a lot about subject-object splits. Let's bring space into the conversation as well. But first, let's take a little look backwards. The concept of space has undergone lots of morphing over the millennia. Plato talked about it as a container in which being becomes. In that rendering, it allows for change, which implies time. Other etymologies link it more strongly with matter itself. For space to enable being to become, Aristotle thought that it might have to have some sort of potency. So for him, it was linked to the material cause, a substrate for being to become. Our modern notion of space, for example, is the emptiness out there between astronomical bodies, is a relatively recent meaning from about 1700s. And Kant then abstracted space into simply a category. So what is it, really? Perhaps it's a boundary of sorts that we assume. Of course, boundary might be too strong a term, since your lungs and even your skin cells are taking in nutrients from air and releasing waste through the cell walls. So there's not really a hard and fast boundary. But then again, air isn't space. I titled a chapter in my book, "Space is Not Made of Space," and didn't put any spaces between the words. That title is a bit of a joke, a bit of a koan. It implies the question, what is space made of? Or does that question contain a category mistake? Because you can't divvy up space as if it's made of smaller particles. Now, why is it important to question our assumptions about space? Because, like language, it is so ubiquitous that we forget about it. Discussions about non-duality of subject and object, for example, often leave space out. We talk about subject-object splits, but not subject-space splits or object-space splits. Steve Rosen brings all 3 together in a neologism of his, he calls it spatio-subobjectivity, the union of space, subject, and object. So what does it mean to become one with space? I'm not going to do it now, but there is a meditation in my book. It's a presentation I gave previously to become one with space. But quickly, let's just use a metaphor to get us into thinking about it. So do you know how your TV works? The screen has lots of little pixels that can be red, green, or blue. And our eyes translate those patterns into recognizable shapes like Timothy Chalamet. Timothy looks like he's moving because the pixel colors change more rapidly than my eye can differentiate. Now, I'm not saying that space is made of pixels or anything like that, but when I move my arm, okay, perhaps it is space reconfiguring itself such that first my arm was here and now it's here. Or the space is there and now the space is there. Maybe that's what Aristotle meant by space being the substrate by which being can become. Next question, Glenn.
First of all, Lisa's book is amazing, so I want to give it a big endorsement. Oh, thank you, thank you. Lisa's book is amazing. I want to give it a big endorsement as soon as it comes out. If people can pre-order it, I recommend it. The question, as you wrote it, is what is the relationship between language and consciousness, which is amazing since we met at the Language of Spirit conference. But I wonder if I can insert one word, maybe? If it, you may, you know, I'll just try. You don't have to answer that if you want. But what is the relationship between language, land, and consciousness? I'd like to ask you, but you know, or you just take the question as written. Thank you so much.
Language, land, and consciousness? Okay. We'll see what comes out of my mouth now. First of all, let's just take language and consciousness, okay? It's not a trick question. It's not a chicken and egg kind of dilemma. I propose, for example, that language and consciousness have a paradoxical, one that is both, relationship. So let me show you something like that, very yin-yangy. Now, I need to do a demonstration. Some of you have seen me do this online and in previous presentations, but we need to think about language and consciousness not as dualities that are separate, not with some sort of space between them, but as our good friend, the Mobius strip. The Mobius strip, unlike its ring-based cousin, which has an inside and an outside, and if I run my finger around the inside, I have to lift it off to run it around the outside. Whereas by putting that little twist in this band, the inside and the outside are now one and the same. I can go all the way around it without lifting my finger up. Okay, this is a model. Now, George Box said that all models are wrong, but some are useful. I find this one to be useful. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the Mobius strip up here as a reminder. So what does this structure bring to this conversation? Okay, it gets us from an either or mindset into a both and mindset. It integrates contained and uncontained. Actually, it's three-dimensional brother, sister, the Klein bottle, it illustrates contained and uncontained even better. It gets us from looking at this as a static thing into looking at it as a dynamic, interpenetrating unity, always in process, in flow. It gets us out of separateness and distinction. Think about how each of these manifests in language and in consciousness into interconnectedness, process, paradox, and unity. So what are the implications of this kind of structure on language and consciousness? The main one, I think anyway, is that if we consider consciousness to be something dynamic, something mutating, integrating, and indeed the people we're talking about and talking with this weekend do posit that, then wouldn't language also want to be dynamic, mutating, and integrating? That would seem logical. But when we look at language in the broad sense over long periods of time, and its more invisible structures like logic and culture, we see that not much, well, I should temper this, that it hasn't changed much, even though it does change all the time. We can still understand Chaucer's language from the 1300s. When that April in his sure sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota. Even though the spelling has changed, the pronunciation has changed, we still get the same metaphors. April's showers have pierced the drought of March, and life springs forth again. What enables us to do that? The words sound different, some are spelled differently. What hasn't changed, for example, are the function words, those little ones, the prepositions, conjunctions, articles. They give us the structure of the sentence. The nouns and verbs give us content, and they change quite a bit. Function words have changed remarkably little over time. Why? They preserve the assumptions we have about the world and how we relate to it. They preserve what Steve Rosen calls object in space before perceiving subject. Language preserves the subject-object split. And I would also say the subject-object space split. Thank you for asking that question first. So here's our dilemma. As we develop our consciousness, as we integrate, we see that there is no subject-object space split. Say that 5 times fast. But our language enforces that split through its structure. So I'm saying, so we come up with new words like interbeing and non-dual, but the function words, the structure of how we put words and ideas together helps to keep them split apart at a deeper level. Many of you have probably experienced some sort of consciousness state where you get that everything is connected to everything. But when you try to talk about it, suddenly all that connectedness is gone. Language forces it to go away because connectedness is not an important enough assumption in our culture for us to have developed language structures to support it. Can I talk about land just briefly? Then I realized I have not gotten to Glenn's question about how land comes into this. We are the land. Gaia, I have more about that. So I'm going to make this brief and I'll bring it up again in another question. If we imagine through using Gebser's notion of transparency, diaphaneity, we can see how we are the land. Its consciousness is our consciousness. You know, from the spinach salad you ate at lunch, for example, that spinach is a product of a seed, some dirt, some water, some sunshine. It becomes you. It becomes the iron in your blood. It becomes your muscles. Its consciousness becomes part of your consciousness. So our consciousness and the land are one and the same when we merge these two forms of consciousness. But I'll have more to say about that. I have a lot more to say about that. Okay, next. Oh, hang on. Mike.
Is it really possible to tell a radically new story using the language structures of the old story?
Excellent question. I'm so glad you asked. So for each type of Gebserian consciousness structure, the way we tell the story about some part of our experience differs. And you all know all of that. I won't go through it. So each type of story has efficient and deficient modes. The efficient mode of mythic storytelling, for example, can work on several different levels simultaneously. The plot, the symbolism, you can understand the story at one level as a child, at another level as an adult. In mental storytelling, such as science, there is less left to the imagination and to interpretation. Valences are lost, but the efficient quality of mental storytelling is that a type of precision is gained. What is different about those two modes of storytelling? Myths tend toward personification. In science, personification is anathema. One illustrates, the other explains, or so we think. If we're sitting over here, we think that if we're sitting over here in the mental consciousness structure, one tends toward metaphor, the other one often denounces metaphor and claims to be literal, even though it can't help but use implicit metaphors. Nevertheless, they both use the same syntax, more or less. They both use similar category structure, although mythic stories might allow for a little more slippage, for example, by personifying animals. They use similar logic, and most importantly, they draw on the same underlying cultural assumptions and beliefs. Ultimately, no, I don't think it's possible to tell a radically new story using the same old language structures. We will have to imagine new ways to develop new types of structures to tell radically new stories. Structures, for example, that integrate. My friend the Mobius. Let's start by integrating polarities. Okay, lots of the speakers on the Zoom discussed polarities. Here's one way we can begin to do it. I'm not saying this is, by any means something we ought to do, but we have to start using the words we have to get us up the ladder, as Wittgenstein says, so that we can, push the ladder away. Another type of new structure, we could integrate various experiences of characters in the story. For example, I often tell a simple story about Jack and Jill going up the hill, as they always do. Okay, the hill, what happens to the hill in that story? It doesn't get acknowledged in the credits. Jack and Jill are experiencing going up the hill, but what is the hill experiencing Jack and Jill? How is the hill experiencing Jack and Jill? Is the hill happy they're there, or is the hill kind of pissed off because they're, traipsing around, ruining all the flowers? Let me just, since my time is kind of short here, let me show a couple of other different types of structures that I've thought of. We were talking about one and many this morning. So this is a glyph I call pluritatis, which shows the ongoingness of the one becoming many. The whole in the whole, that little hole on the right-hand side, becoming something, and then the something going back to becoming a whole without the W. This one I call fu angu. It means the deeper you look, the less it looks like itself. And when you get to the center, it looks like the opposite of what you started with. And this it also is a process. So it's what Plato used to examine concepts like justice for example. It's what you do in science when you look at matter and you get deeper and deeper into the structure of matter. You find that there's really nothing there. It's just a bunch of vibrations happening. This one is called muishiwa. It means there is only one side that serves as both sides. That's this guy. Do I have time for one more question or not, Dave? Okay, let's go for one last quick question.
I was going to insert a question, which is probably not allowed. I was going to ask, but you just answered it, if noodling would help. So in the sciences, you can show connectivity with design drawings and with noodling around, but your drawings are beautiful. So you already answered that question. I'm going to stick to my script here. How do we switch between figure and ground, where what is figure, quote, figure at one level and, quote, ground at another, especially if meaning or truth changes when we switch between figure and ground, when the switch between figure and ground is made? That's a big question. Sorry.
Okay, so another way of saying this is what we perceive as a unity at one level becomes context at another level. So if an organ isn't functioning well, for example, your heart or your liver, we can look at the heart and ask what's wrong with it. A cellular biologist would say, oh, that's too general. You have to look at what the cells are doing. How is the cell malfunctioning? A naturopath would say, oh, no, you have to look at the whole body because the whole body is affecting the heart. So when we're dealing with polarities that are in a Kleinian relationship, that is understood as a diversity within unity, there might be different truths that are all true, but it depends on whether you're considering the system from a local context, like being an ant walking on the Mobius strip might think it looks one way. If you're outside of it, it looks a different way. So Dave has given me the stop sign. Thank you very much for your wonderful questions. No, seriously, thank you. Thank you for participating in this co-creative endeavor, because that wasn't the order I wrote them in, but that was the order we got.
Yeah.
And you did that. And that's what we have to do moving forward into the future. Thanks.